Milling Through History presents The Philosopher of Liberalism. When it comes to philosophical study and understanding government principle, the name John Stuart Mill might not be the very first one that comes to mind. However, he is a rather influential figure when it comes to much of our own modern thinking, without us even realizing he was the one that got the ball rolling to begin with. And so, in today's episode, we want to take a look at this rather early pioneer of liberal beliefs in order to get a better idea of exactly how it was he came to come up with all of his ideas. John Stuart Mill was born May the 20th, 1806. His father was a believer in a principle referred to as associationism, where the intellectual development of a child was based upon those from whom the child associated with. As a result, Mill was oftentimes kept away from children his own age, with the only exception being that of his siblings. By having Mill stay around specifically adults, the belief of associationism is that the knowledge and just upbringing of the adults would then be transferred to the child, and therefore the child would be raised exactly the way the adult wanted them to be. There did seem, however, to be some light into this particular method of raising a child, as his education was quite rigorous. At the age of 3, Mill learned Greek. At the age of 8, he learned Latin. And by the age of 10, he could quite easily understand and debate Plato. By the age of 14, though, he would go off to Paris and begin to develop his views on the world. One of the things he had learned is that just the idea of creating a just society was next to impossible, which led him to deal with a bout of severe depression. In order to combat this, though, he was introduced to the poetry of William Wordsworth, and upon reading this, Mill came to the realization that beauty creates compassion and therefore stimulates joy. Upon coming to this conclusion, this would help to discern him from his father and also aided in his views on a new guiding principle, which was positivism. Now, positivism is a philosophical theory which states that positive or certain knowledge is formed specifically through sensory experience and is interpreted through reason and logic. Therefore, if there is something you enjoy and you indulge yourself into it and experience it to its full abilities, then you will learn and therefore become smarter. At the age of 17, Mill would go work for the East India Company along with his father, and he would rise to the ranks of this particular business as long as the company has existed. During his tenure at the East India Company, he would ardently defend British imperialism, stating that British despotism, while certainly not necessarily something people would want to encourage, was rather benevolent, so long as the barbarous people for which were being ruled by the British were being improved upon. It is also believed that this particular view of imperialism is what follows through in what's called noblesse oblige. Namely, it is the obligation of the noble to take care of those who are less fortunate than himself. In 1851, he would marry his longtime friend and confidant, Harriet Taylor, and it was through her that Mill became an advocate for women's rights, not only in the form of property, but also through suffrage. His most famous line, which is oftentimes not even attributed to him, was, "Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing." Now, Mill's own liberalism was such that it created quite a stir, as he was one of the first individuals to advocate for the easement of burdens on Ireland, and in 1866 would call upon Parliament to grant women the right to vote. Now, while most people do not necessarily realize how important the call for women's rights were in the 1860s, it was something that Mill was rather passionate towards. In 1873, though, he would pass away and would be buried in France next to his wife. And, aside from philosophers and students of government theory, his name virtually falls off the face of the earth. However, in popular culture, every so often there would be limericks and poems written about him, And on ABC's show American Housewife, actor Diedrich Bader would bring back the name of John Stuart Mill, as his character Greg Otto often looks at Mill as an inspiration and source of education. And therefore, even in the 21st century, the name of John Stuart Mill still comes up. Now be sure to click like, share, and subscribe for future episodes of Milling Through History, and leave comments below for future episode ideas. And be sure to take a look at our suggested reading page.